Hello there everyone. So, first off, sorry again for not uploading a video last week. From 2 weeks from today, I will try to get at least one video out per week, as I have been doing from 2 weeks from now. So, missing out next week, week after that, should be back to once a week regular content, hopefully. But between creating a presentation and writing a 12,000 word essay for uni course, I somehow had the time to script this video, so you're all very welcome. Now then, pointless intro out the way, on to today's video. This month's console retrospective video is on the GameCube, so let's get into it. So in this video we'll talk about the entire history of the GameCube from release to discontinuation. We'll be discussing the story of the GameCube's time on the market, the technological specifications of the console, and how it was ultimately unable to really create a dent in the market. So before we discuss the GameCube, we kind of need to briefly discuss its predecessor, now the N64. Now the N64 is a strange console, for a lot of reasons, not just because of the controller. But firstly, and probably the thing that hurt it the most, was the fact that it was a cartridge-based system. Now, up to that point, that wasn't too bad. Like, before the N64, cartridge consoles were, they were seen as, the normal standard thing that everything used. But this was the 5th generation of consoles. To still be using cartridges was seen as archaic and strange to consumers, and it was seen as annoying to developers. Cartridges can't store as much data as a CD-ROM, and cartridges are incapable of displaying full motion video or playing CD quality audio. Since most developers wanted to be more ambitious with their games in the 5th generation, i.e. better graphics, full motion video cutscenes, and better sound quality, they needed the extra benefits of CD-ROM, and the PlayStation was the perfect system for them to develop games for, as the PlayStation was proving to be successful, and it was cheap not only for the consumer to buy compared to the Sega Saturn, which was the other CD-ROM console of the generation, which was way more expensive and way less appealing to developers and consumers for its own host of reasons. It was also pretty cheap to develop games for and produce games for, because producing a cartridge, you've got to get the chipsets, you've got to get the outer mold, you've got to get the pins, you've got to get the artwork for the cartridge. It's quite expensive producing a cartridge. And then producing a CD is you just stamp a disc. It's way less effort and it's way less time consuming and much cheaper for the developer. So it's clear why developers were annoyed at the fact that Nintendo had stuck with cartridges. Many of them left Nintendo to go work on the PlayStation, and to a smaller extent the Sega Saturn, but that's a very small portion of developers. But it put the N64 in a strange place, both then and now. Back then, for the reason we just discussed, it was a modern system boasting it was the most powerful because it was 64-bit compared to the PlayStation's 32-bit. But it used cartridges, and everyone's thought, cartridges, they're old, they're not good. CDs are the new thing, and that's what we want. So, made the N64 look old while technically being possibly the most powerful. Had it had CD-ROM, it could probably have been the most powerful, because the 64-bit processor is probably stronger than the PlayStation's 32-bit processor. Makes sense. But it's weird now, because the N64 is remembered as a huge success. If you've heard of it, you'll think, that was successful, it was a Nintendo system. It was a Nintendo system before the release of the Wii U, so it must be successful, yeah? Well, not really. It came second place, but it was a distant second place. There were something like 9 or so consoles in the 5th generation, but most of them were already discontinued by the time the N64 came out. Really, there was 3, being the PlayStation, the N64, and the Saturn. But the N64 sold 36 million units. Big step down from the NES and SNES, but still relatively successful. The PlayStation sold over 100 million. Doesn't look too impressive anymore, does it? But another weird thing about the N64 is, it's remembered as this huge success with so many great games, but the entire N64 library is actually smaller than the Dreamcast library, which is considered failure. Like, the Dreamcast is considered this huge failure, but it had more games than the N64. Just saying, the N64 is strange. And then again, the Dreamcast was only commercially relevant for half the amount of time the N64 was, so it makes the N64 one of history's stranger consoles. Like, that'll be an interesting one to do a retrospective on sometime. Maybe next month or sometime, but N64 is a strange story, like, it's unusual. But going into the 6th generation, the PlayStation and the N64 had put Nintendo in a weird position. A position they'd never been in before. 2nd place. They'd gone from ruling the worldwide industry of video games with the NES and SNES to the underdog in an industry they'd once ruled with unquestioned authority. The Genesis was a fierce competitor in the 4th generation, but ultimately Sega lost, leaving Nintendo on top once more with an iron fist with their Super Nintendo. But now they were in 2nd place, with everything to prove, and that's where the story of the GameCube begins. The GameCube was codenamed the Dolphin during its launch, and it was officially released on September 14th, 2001 in Japan. It was the first time it was released. Systems usually did that, they released in Japan first, and then North America and Europe would get them later on. They don't tend to do that now, it's more so North America than Europe, and then Japan gets them later. They used to be weird, they used to have, like, systems would come out a year early in Japan, and then come out in North America and Europe a year later. But November 18th, 2001 was the North American launch, and May 3rd, 2002 in Europe. This was kind of like that last system to really have that huge delay between the American launch and the European launch. I don't know why they ever did that, but it is what it is. But by the time the GameCube had come out, the PlayStation 2 had been out for over a year in all territories. Almost a year and a half here in Europe. And it was definitely proving to be more than a worthy successor to the original PlayStation. Also, by this point, the Dreamcast had been discontinued in all territories. So you might think that gives Nintendo, like, makes it easier for them, gives them an advantage. But you'll soon see that's not the case. Because it's the 6th generation. The 6th generation means PlayStation 2. Honestly, PlayStation 2 kind of just destroyed everything. But anyway, in terms of sales. Anyway, when the GameCube launched, it was, without a doubt, the most powerful console ever made, technologically. Unfortunately, the Xbox, well, unfortunately, depends which one you prefer. But unfortunately for Nintendo, the Xbox would release only a short time after, and it would easily take that title away from the GameCube. But the GameCube did easily outclass the PS2 in terms of the power of the CPU and GPU. But unfortunately, this increased power wasn't enough to allow the GameCube to really have a place in the market. We'll see later why, despite having the extra power, it didn't actually help Nintendo, and it wasn't obvious to the consumer either. We'll get back into that in a sec. So the GameCube came 3rd out of 4. Dreamcast being 4th, then GameCube, then Xbox, then PS2. But then again, when you think about it, the Dreamcast came 4th, distant 4th, but it was discontinued before the GameCube even launched. So some people say that it doesn't count in that comparison, which, I mean, it does, because it's not a 5th generation system. It is a 6th generation system, it just launched so early and finished so early that it didn't really have a chance to compete with all 3 of the other systems. But it is part of the 4th generation, the 6th generation. But if you take that into consideration, the fact that the Dreamcast isn't considered by everyone for that list, the GameCube came last. So, but you might be thinking, how is that? How did Nintendo come last? How did Nintendo, who had been 1st place easily twice in a row, and then 2nd place, albeit a distant 2nd place, but still, 2nd place, like, everyone took them seriously still. But honestly, there's really one reason why the GameCube basically never managed to catch on. The GameCube's extra power of the PS2 was useless, because Nintendo had done the same thing they'd done with the N64. They made the exact same mistake by using this mini DVD format. You see, This is what killed the GameCube. These mini DVDs basically shot them in the foot. They basically lost before they could even start. Just because of this. And the strange thing is, it's the exact same reason the N64 had such a difficult time. You see, Nintendo always seems very reluctant to move on, really. They like to use older hardware, or with the GameCube, just completely random hardware. Like, I mean, there's no reason to use the mini DVD. I mean, you could say piracy, to prevent piracy, but, I mean, other than that, what's your advantage? The mini DVD could only hold 1.5 gigabytes of data per disc. Now, granted, that is far higher than cartridge systems. Like, compared to the N64, that's huge. Like, the biggest N64 game was like 128 megabytes. And that was, like, compressed really far down to fit onto an N64 cartridge. But that was the biggest N64 cartridge. So 1.5 gigabytes seems like a big improvement. And then also, when you compare it to that of the PlayStation, which used CD-ROMs, which stored 700 megabytes of data. And then even if you compare it to the Dreamcast, with its 1 gigabyte GD-ROM, the GameCube seems to be doing good. But that's the problem. It only seems to be doing good because we're comparing it to older systems, which used older formats, or custom formats. The GameCube was competing against the PS2 and the Xbox, which both used DVD format. New at the time, DVD-ROM format, which could hold up to 8 gigabytes of data per disc. Something like the GameCube, again, looks far less impressive. But unfortunately for Nintendo's 6th generation system, it just gets even worse. Just look at the GameCube for a moment. Then think about the PS2 and the Dreamcast. You see them? Like, you get what I mean, right? You see, you can picture what the GameCube would look like next to a PS2 and a Dreamcast, right? If you look at the PS2 and the Dreamcast, your natural reaction would be, your actual first reaction is, that's a game console. The GameCube, it doesn't feel like those two. It doesn't give off that feeling of, oh, this is definitely a game console. Like, I mean, it doesn't look like it fits in with the serious-looking PS2, Dreamcast, and Xbox. More so the PS2 and Xbox, because the Dreamcast already discontinued, but you know. The PS2 and Xbox are these big, huge machines, right? They take up a lot of space, and they look like game consoles, right? The GameCube doesn't really feel like that. But honestly, it was far worse for the GameCube at the start, because Nintendo did something that I don't think anyone has ever done intentionally. I don't think they did it intentionally either, but this is how it seemed with everything leading up to the GameCube. Now you see, this is the Platinum GameCube. This was released later in the lifespan. But at launch, there was a black GameCube, and there was a purple GameCube. This basically kind of seemed like Nintendo made an adult version of the GameCube for adults, and a child version for kids. I'm sure you can tell which is which. Now, the black one probably looks more like a console, but the purple one is what most people associated with it, because that was the one that was shown in a lot of trailers. Like, the purple one is, when you think GameCube, you think purple. The purple one kind of looks like a child's toy. That's what was going through customers' heads. They'd see the PS2, they'd see the Xbox, and then they'd see the GameCube. They'd see all three of them, and they'd think the purple one looks like a child's toy, and it's not to be taken seriously. And we combine that with the tiny DVD format as well. It kind of just, this whole thing, this system basically is what started the whole Nintendo's kid-centric thing that they're now famous for today. Unintentionally. We'll get back to that, because they didn't try to make it like that for the most part. Like, they tried to really pick the reputation of the system up. We'll get back to that in a minute. But it really seemed like Nintendo had no idea what to do with the GameCube. It almost felt like Nintendo didn't want to move past the N64, but they had to. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had a chance in the market. It kind of feels similar to the Wii U. It seems like Nintendo didn't want to move past the Wii, but they reluctantly released the Wii U so that they could remain competitive, in huge air quotes, because the Wii U didn't exactly sell well. Now, I'm sure that's not entirely true, but that's how it felt in both cases. That's how it feels to the average consumer. And that hurts sales. I mean, the GameCube and Wii U are proof that thought, that kid-centric thought, and that confused company trying to sell you a product but not knowing what to do with it, it all makes you think that it's not worth buying. Which is a shame for the GameCube and the Wii U, because both are phenomenal systems, which we'll get back into the GameCube in a minute. We'll talk about the Wii U some other time. But the GameCube is a really good system, and it really did miss out because of poor marketing. But by the end of the GameCube's life, it had sold just over 21 million units, and had over 650 titles released worldwide. The GameCube basically marked the final time that Nintendo truly tried to market their console to gamers directly. After the GameCube, they began marketing to everybody else. The casual market, you know, the people that just play Candy Crush and Just Dance and, you know, all that kind of stuff. That's what the Wii did. The GameCube did not set out to do that. Nintendo tried by releasing plenty of M-rated games. Like, well, M-rated? We're not American. They released plenty of mature games, right? Like, games that were, like, you know, for teenagers and adults. You know, games that adults could enjoy, while also having their same, you know, family-friendly Nintendo brand games. You know, Mario, Zelda, Metroid, etc. But the Wii was basically what truly set Nintendo down that path of kid-centric, casual gamer mode. But the GameCube kind of started that due to some poor decisions. Honestly, the mini DVD format killed the system. I don't know why. Like, imagine if the GameCube was released at the same price as the PS2. So, $300, right? $300, £250, etc., etc. But imagine it had a DVD player. If it could play DVDs, it would have probably sold a lot more. If it could play DVDs right out of the box, like the PS2 could, and like the Xbox could, although the Xbox you had to buy some peripheral to get it to work, but imagine that. The GameCube had DVDs, it would have had all the third-party games that the PS2 and Xbox got, and it would have had the same kind of support, but you would have had all those great Nintendo games as well. It could have been so successful, but Nintendo just doesn't. They don't think sometimes, it seems. Like, why did they do the mini DVD thing? They did move on to DVDs with the Wii. That is one thing they did technically advance with the Wii. The Wii is very underpowered. We'll get back to that in a sec. But the GameCube really put Nintendo down this problem they have with their reputation, or they had. They're really turning it around with the Switch, but the reputation that they've had since 2001, well, 2006, started with the GameCube and continued throughout the Wii and Wii U's life. And the whole image problem really started with this console because it has a small and childish appearance, and it uses that horrible mini DVD. I'm sorry, but I just can't get past how annoying that is. Like, I mean, it doesn't really affect people in the modern world now who are getting the GameCube, but back then, they could have sold so much more if they just used a DVD. If they just had a DVD drive, it would have been more expensive, but it would have saved them so much loss. I don't know how much, I don't know if the GameCube caused any losses or anything, but it would have helped so much if they just had a DVD drive. But anyway, if you bought it back in the day, you understand how amazing it truly is. Because the GameCube is phenomenal. has so many great games. Such a brilliant controller. It was amazing in almost every way. But Nintendo just couldn't sell it due to some poor decisions and confusion in the market and the mini DVD. This mini DVD is the cause of so many problems. Not that one specifically, but you know, the format as a whole on the GameCube caused so much trouble. But anyway, that's it for the story of the system. I mean, there's probably more that we could discuss, but I kind of want this video to be a reasonable length. It's probably already going to be pretty long, as are most of my videos, but you know. I want it to be reasonable, so we'll briefly discuss the specs, then we'll talk about physical attributes and qualities, the controller, and all that kind of stuff, and then we'll finish with final thoughts. So, the GameCube had a custom PowerPC processor called the Gecko, which was clocked at 485 MHz. Fun fact, the Wii's processor is essentially an overclocked GameCube processor clocked at 729 MHz. And the Wii U's processor is essentially an overclocked Wii processor. So basically, this processor in the GameCube, the Gecko, was used for 16 years. From 2001 to 2017. And then actually, another side note here. The original Xbox's processor, you know, that console came out in 2001, was clocked at 733 MHz. A console from 2001 outclassed the Wii, technologically. A console that came out in 2006. Just let that sink in. That's what people mean when they say Nintendo hardware is underpowered. Anyway, back to the GameCube. The GPU on the GameCube, was a custom ATI processor named the Flipper. As you can see, possibly, on the front of the system here, you've got a sticker that says, graphics supplied by ATI. Just basically thanking them for making the system. They released a custom one, where this jewel in the middle said, like, just said thanks to ATI for supplying the graphics or something. But that's pretty cool. Like, ATI have basically supported Nintendo systems by giving them graphics chips since the GameCube. I don't know if they did it with the Switch. I don't think they did. But GameCube, Wii, and Wii U all use ATI graphics. And the Flipper was clocked at 162 MHz, which was pretty decent for the time. Not as good as the Xbox, but nothing in 6th generation was technologically. But on to the design of the system. It did cause problems, but I actually quite like it. The aesthetic of this console, I think it's pretty good. It's compact and it's sturdy, and it's clearly a functional design, as there's not been a lot of complaints with any GameCube trouble, like hardware-wise. Like, it's a very reliable system. So, as you can see on the front, it had 4 controller ports, which was brilliant for multiplayer games. Speaking of which, the controller. This controller right here is easily one of the best controllers ever made. Not even just best Nintendo controllers. This controller is one of the best controllers ever made. It's such a huge improvement over the N64 controller. I mean, right, see these triggers, right? These triggers are, without a doubt, the best triggers of all time. On any controller, bar none. No questions asked. They're just so satisfying to press. Like, I mean, if you have a GameCube controller, these are the greatest triggers ever made. I mean, having one shoulder button here is a bit weird, but it doesn't really affect a lot of games. I mean, at first you see it, and it's like, it's a bit weird looking, but I mean, well, first off, you saw the N64 controller, you already know this is a huge improvement. And secondly, when you hold it, it just melts into your hands, honestly. It's a brilliant controller. But the GameCube controller is also famous for another reason, other than being amazing and being considered the best controller to play Smash Bros. With. It was the first controller, not this one, but there was a model of the GameCube controller that was completely wireless. And it was the first true wireless controller ever made. And it was called the Wavebird. it's a decently rare controller. I mean, you could probably find one pretty easily, but they're decently expensive, and then you need to get the adapter to plug into here so that it works properly. So, but the Wavebird's a really good controller. I mean, it doesn't have rumble, but I mean, honestly, it's not that bad a trade-off, honestly. But there were wireless controllers before the Wavebird, but they were IR-based, like a TV remote. IR-based wireless controllers are dreadful, okay? There's never been a good one in the history of ever. They're dreadful, they barely work, they're trash. Every console had them and they just suck, okay? Don't bother. Use the wired controller. Get a controller extension wire if you need it, but don't get the IR wired controllers. Don't get the IR wireless controllers. They're horrible. But the Wavebird didn't use IR, thankfully, otherwise it would have just been a huge failure. It didn't use Bluetooth like modern controllers do. It used radio frequencies. So basically, you had a dial on the bottom of the controller, down here, like, because there was a big module here for the wireless technology to go, fill in this gap. There was a dial on the bottom of it that you would tune to a specific number. Then on the adapter that you plug into the system, you would put that dial to the same numbers on the controller, and it would work perfectly. You didn't have to have a clear line of sight. You didn't have to point it at the console directly. You just had to have the numbers the same, and it would work like a modern day controller. So the radio frequency that this used were way better than the garbage IR controllers of the past. And the Wavebird was honestly the foundation of Bluetooth controllers that we have now on the PS4, Xbox One, Switch, Wii U, PS3. I don't think the 360 used Bluetooth. I think it used something else. I don't know. I'm pretty sure people have said the 360 doesn't use Bluetooth controllers, but I can't honestly remember. But anyway, that's it. The GameCube retrospective. Overall, without a doubt, this console's a must-have. I mean, I know I kind of, like, you know, bashed it for having the mini DVD format, but that doesn't detract from how great the system is now. Like, back in the day, people didn't want to buy a GameCube because of the mini DVD format. They thought it was like a kid's toy or something. But now that we all know what it is, and we all have seen what it's done, we can see how great it is if you get it, right? The GameCube is pretty cheap at the moment. Like, it's a pretty cheap retro system at the moment. So is all the 6th gen stuff, except for the Dreamcast. That is slowly climbing in value. Well, not slowly. It's pretty expensive to get Dreamcast stuff. But there are certain Dreamcast games that you can get that will cost more than a GameCube and a decent stack of games. Like, easily. And I mean, they're like games that you probably should have for it. Like, some of the games that were on my top 10 Dreamcast list are more expensive than a GameCube and a good couple games. Like, I paid £40 for my GameCube with the controller and 2 games and all the wires. I had to buy the memory card separately for £5. But, you know, the GameCube's cheap to get into, and games are pretty cheap for the most part as well. Except for the Nintendo ones, because they're never cheap. I mean, what I said about the Dreamcast games could apply to GameCube games as well. There are some GameCube games that are more expensive than the console itself, but, you know, there are hundreds of great games on the GameCube. To list a few, you got Sonic Heroes, Super Smash Bros. Melee, Mario Sunshine, Mario Kart Double Dash, Luigi's Mansion, Metroid Prime, Resident Evil 4, Metal Gear Solid, Twin Snakes, remakes of all the Resident Evil games up to 4, Spider-Man 2, you know, I could just go on and on and on. But the GameCube may have had a small library, but it was a really good one. I love this console, and you should love this console because it's absolutely amazing. And now, like the Dreamcast, it gets more love than it did during its commercially relevant lifetime. Although, nowhere near as much as the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast, it's kind of absurd how much love that system gets for being dead for 18 years. But the GameCube was, and still is, a phenomenal system. Well worth your time and money. So that's the end of this video. Thank you all for watching. This was pretty hard to make, and it was probably harder to find the time to actually create and script it, so I hope the effort was worth it. Also, for those of you who have been watching since the start, you may have noticed that videos don't get uploaded on Wednesdays anymore. Videos are now going to start going up on Thursdays. What I used to do was, I would record a video on a Tuesday and have it uploaded for Wednesday. For those of you who don't know, my internet connection is dreadful. It would take a day to upload a video. So if I film this on the Wednesday, it can be uploaded for Thursday. That's how it is, because I don't have time on a Tuesday anymore to film it. So, hopefully that schedule works for everyone. Sorry if it doesn't, because I can't really do anything about it. But anyway, back to what I said at the start. I said there wouldn't be a video next week, and there won't be a video next week because I'll be away all weekend and won't get a chance to record or upload it. Sorry to, do that again after just not releasing a video last week. But the following week, so week after next week, I'll be back with a brand new video, and I think it'll be a why some system failed or succeeded, and I'm thinking maybe doing the Wii U. Why the Wii U failed, because that's a pretty interesting story. Trust me, if I decide to do that, that will be interesting. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching this video and all my other content. I hope you have all enjoyed this video. If any of you have any suggestions for future content, then please leave a comment saying what you'd like to see. As always, any relevant suggestions will be considered for a video. So, if you want to see something, leave a comment saying what you want to see. Thank you all again so much for your continued support, and goodbye.